The sharp clang of metal hitting concrete rang out through the dim, greasy air of the auto garage. A broken screwdriver had slipped from Zaria's hand, slicing a deep gash between her fingers. Blood trickled down her palm, dripping onto the floor, already stained with oil and faded streaks of old paint. Zaria clenched her teeth. No scream, no complaint. She shot a quick glance toward the manager's office. The frosted glass door still shut. No one came out. No one asked if she was okay. "You all right, ma'am?" A raspy, concerned voice broke the silence. It was the new assistant, just hired a few days ago. He wore a beat-up baseball cap and torn gloves. People called him John, or at least, that's the name they knew. Zaria nodded, wrapping the wound with an old rag. "I'm fine. Not like they hand out first aid kits around here anyway." That man, unknown to everyone, was actually Julian Cross, CEO of Blake Tech Automotive. He swallowed hard, staring at Zaria's blood-soaked hand. He didn't say a word, but inside him, something cracked. This was the company that carried his father's name, the company he had once taken pride in, and yet here it was, functioning off the silent wounds of people like Zaria, just to save a few lines on a budget report. Julian had always believed his company was a model of efficiency, but in that moment, he saw the truth. Behind every profit report was sweat, blood, and the quiet suffering of the invisible, and never in his life had he seen someone work so hard, only to be treated like they didn't exist. Julian stood by the tool rack, pretending to inspect a bolt, when Calvin Reed, the area manager, burst into the garage with hurried steps and a scowl on his face. A Honda Civic still sat idle on the lift. "Zaria, that car was supposed to be done an hour ago. What is this? A family-run auto shop to you?" Calvin's voice boomed across the workshop, slicing through the air like a blade. Zaria didn't respond. She simply wiped her hands on her work shirt, swallowed the pain in her injured left hand, and bent back down to keep working on the car's electronic system. But Julian noticed something. Just moments earlier, Calvin had walked right past two other mechanics, both white men. One was sipping coffee, the other scrolling through his phone. Not a word, not even a glance. After the shift in a dusty storage room full of old car parts, Julian stumbled upon a rusted filing cabinet. Inside were stacks of old reports. He flipped through them and felt his stomach drop. Accident records, dozens of them. The same name over and over, Zaria Thompson. Deep cuts, chemical burns, crushed fingers, and under the column labeled cause, always the same two words, employee error. Tucked behind the files was an internal memo, sent by Calvin himself. Delay equipment upgrades, not urgent, budget optimization, profit priority. Julian shut the folder, his fist clenched. She wasn't just being ignored. She was being quietly worn down, day by day, because of decisions made in boardrooms he once believed were doing the right thing. Julian returned to the cheap motel near the garage, the one he'd been staying in during his time undercover. That night, instead of sleeping, he laid out every document across the table. Accident reports, internal memos, budget notes. Everything seemed legitimate until he saw it. The digital signature from Blake Tech's finance department. Under every budget cut, under every delayed safety upgrade, was official approval from corporate headquarters. And what hit the hardest? Some of those signatures belonged to executives Julian had personally hired. Cost optimization. Replace old equipment only upon total failure. Reduce frequency of routine inspections to conserve manpower. Julian sat frozen. On the table in front of him was an old photograph he always carried, a picture of his late father, standing beside the first car they ever fixed together. That man once told him, You can cut everything, except kindness. And yet here, Julian was. Through gleaming performance reports and tidy spreadsheets, he had unknowingly legitimized a machine that was grinding down people like his father once was, and like Zaria was now. The profits he used to take pride in were now soaked in blood. We've used the name of efficiency to legalize indifference, and for the first time, Julian wasn't sure if he still deserved to be CEO. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty glass of the garage, casting a golden hue over the oil-stained concrete floor. Julian was helping Zaria remove the clutch from a pickup truck when he noticed her hand trembling, still raw from an unhealed injury. He hesitated. Zaria, why don't you find another job? This place is dangerous. The conditions are awful, let out a dry and the management's even worse. It held no humor, only the weight of something worn thin. I've applied to 6 other shops, she said. They look at my skin, they look at my gender, and then they ask if I actually know how to fix cars, or if I'm just a janitor dressed like a mechanic. She looked up. There was no bitterness in her eyes, just the exhaustion of someone who'd been underestimated one too many times. This place might be terrible, but at least here, they admit I know what I'm doing. Julian fell silent, and suddenly everything in his mind clicked into place. It wasn't that Zaria didn't have options. It was that society never gave her any better ones. At Blake Tech, a place he once believed stood for opportunity and fairness, this was the least awful place a woman of color could cling to, just to survive. And for the first time, Julian truly understood what privilege meant. He had never once needed to prove his worth through blood on his hands. Zaria had done it every single day, and still she was treated like a problem to manage. That morning, Julian was wiping down an oil filter when his phone buzzed in his pocket. An anonymous message. No name, no text, just an audio recording. He put in his earbuds, and Calvin's voice rang out, clear, unfiltered, and completely unashamed. I only hired her so HR would shut up about the diversity thing. So what if she knows how to fix cars? Does she know how to stay quiet? If she so much as mentions safety again, she's out. Julian froze in place, right there in the middle of the garage. That voice recording wasn't just proof of discrimination. It was a cold confession. A man admitting he viewed the lives of his employees as nothing more than PR strategies. A few hours later, Calvin called for a quick staff meeting in the garage, citing disciplinary reinforcement. Zaria stood surrounded by co-workers, her work shirt dusty and soaked in sweat. Her injured hand was still wrapped in the same worn bandage, but her eyes burned with clarity. I'm only asking for what labor law already guarantees, she said, calm but firm. Standard safety equipment, proper gloves. Calvin stepped forward, voice low but loud enough for everyone to hear. This is your final warning, Zaria. You stir up trouble again, and I won't hesitate to put you out. Zaria didn't flinch. Julian clenched his fists behind his back. The only reason she was even hired was to make the company look good, but the reason she was threatened every day was because she dared to ask for the bare minimum every human deserves. And in that moment, Julian knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. But if he spoke up now, he'd blow the entire plan. He needed more proof. And when he acted, it had to be undeniable. So no one could look away. A sleek black luxury sedan rolled into the garage on a sweltering afternoon. Julian recognized the car instantly. It belonged to the city's mayor, who was dropping by Blake Tech to see the quality of service in action. Calvin strutted out of his office like he was stepping onto a red carpet, crisp white shirt, neatly knotted tie, a polished smile stretched across his face. "Zaria, this car's a top priority. Get it done fast. Get it done spotless. No mistakes." Zaria bent down to inspect underneath the car, her old, tattered gloves barely holding together. But just as she slid beneath the chassis, Julian, standing a few feet away, noticed something wrong. The hydraulic jack, one that had been flagged multiple times, was leaking oil, and it hissed with a high-pitched whine that made the hair on his arms stand up. "Zaria!" Julian shouted. She rolled out just in time, barely a second before the car slammed down onto the concrete floor, metal crashing with a thunderous bang. The tires hit the ground. The mayor turned pale. The entire garage froze. Calvin rushed over, but didn't ask Zaria if she was okay. "Embarrass me in front of a VIP?" Zaria, still catching her breath, stood her ground. Her eyes were blazing. "I've reported that equipment for months. There are emails, logs, signatures." "You're fired," Calvin growled, his face flushing red, effective immediately. Julian didn't move. Every muscle in his body was tense, but in his eyes was cold calculation, because every second, every word had been recorded. Zaria bowed her head, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion, because no one should have to keep fighting this hard, alone. The night Zaria was fired, Julian sat alone in his makeshift office at the motel. The glow of the desk lamp reflected off the scattered documents spread across the table. A new email came in, from Vanessa, head of legal. "We've reviewed the budget approval chain. There are irregularities. The trail leads back to the finance department." Julian typed back, "Who's behind it?" "Mitchell Crane, executive vice president. He quietly approved every single cut Calvin proposed. And Mitchell just called for an emergency board of directors meeting next week. Agenda item: vote of no confidence in CEO Julian Cross." Julian didn't need to hear more. The puzzle pieces slammed into place like a punch to the gut. Calvin was just a pawn. Mitchell was holding the reins, and a whole network of senior managers, the very people who once sat beside him at the strategy table, were now turning their backs, trying to remove him from the seat his father once held. To them, Julian wasn't a CEO. He was a traitor to profit for choosing to stand with the workers. This fight was no longer just about Zaria. It wasn't just about a garage. It was about an empire, rotting from the top down. And Julian knew, if he failed, then men like Calvin would keep using the word efficiency to crush lives like hers. Forever. Calvin's voice echoed through the garage, still laced with rage. "You're fired. Do you hear me? Get out of here before you drag this whole place straight to hell." Zaria stood her ground. Blood from her old wound had soaked through the bandage. The mayor, still present, watched the scene in stunned silence, clearly struggling to process what was unfolding. And then, a calm, steady voice rose from the back of the room. "No one's getting fired today." "Except you, Calvin." Calvin spun around. Julian stepped forward, still in his work clothes, but now holding his cap in his hand. His eyes were razor sharp. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Calvin growled. "I'm Julian Cross, Chief Executive Officer of Blake Tech Automotive, and I've seen enough." A wave of silence swept through the entire shop. Amira Chang and Delilah Stone entered the room, each holding a tablet. They tapped their screens, revealing evidence that could not be denied. A video clip of Calvin shouting at Zaria. A voice recording, "I only hired her so HR would shut up." Altered accident reports. Forged finance approvals for cutting safety equipment. Julian locked eyes with Calvin. "You thought I didn't know? You turned this place into a sweatshop that bleeds the very people who are 10 times better than you'll ever be. And now, your little game is over." The mayor turned to Amira, his voice quiet but firm. "Do we need to escalate this to the city authorities?" "No," Julian said. "I already have everything I need." And for the first time in his life, Calvin had nothing left to say. The main conference room at Blake Tech headquarters was packed. On one side sat the senior shareholders and board of directors, their faces tight under the cold white lights. On the other side, people who had never set foot in this room before, technicians, mechanics, and Zaria herself, wearing her faded work jacket. Mitchell Crane, executive vice president, and glanced at Julian with the smug confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "We'll now begin the vote on whether to continue or terminate the term of CEO Julian Cross," Mitchell announced. Before that, Julian stood, voice steady. "I'll take my allotted 15 minutes to speak, as granted by company bylaws." He nodded to Delilah. The projector flickered to life. One by one, the images filled the screen. A photo of Zaria, injured by faulty equipment. Budget documents manipulated by Mitchell with forged approvals. An audio clip, Mitchell speaking to Calvin. "Keep her around to boost the diversity report, but if she causes trouble, fire her immediately." The room erupted in murmurs. Mitchell snapped, trying to regain control. "This is emotional manipulation. We need to speak in numbers." "Fine," Julian said calmly, with a slight smile. "Let's look at the numbers and the human beings behind them." Zaria stepped forward. She carried no folders, no reports. She simply rolled up her sleeve. A long scar ran down her arm. "This," she said softly, "was from a faulty lift. I reported it 3 times. No one fixed it. I'm not here asking for sympathy. I'm here asking one question. If this company can ignore the blood of its workers, what else is left for you to protect?" No one answered. The entire room sat in silence, confronted by a truth that no profit margin could ever wash away. After Zaria finished speaking, Julian stepped forward once more. The screen behind him no longer showed bleeding hands or accident reports. Instead, it displayed charts and data, taken from the pilot garage where he had quietly launched his reforms. "It's been 3 weeks since we replaced all outdated equipment, retrained our staff, and made safety our top priority." He pressed a button. The screen lit up with results, plus 28% increase in worker productivity, 0 negative customer feedback, plus 15% rise in net profit, 0 recorded workplace accidents. The room was stunned. People who had once feared that kindness would cut into profits were now staring at proof that kindness is profit, sustainable, measurable, and free of blood. One board member finally spoke. "So, this unrealistic reform they criticized you for, it's actually turning a real profit?" Julian nodded. "And real trust, from employees, customers, and the community." The vote began, each ballot cast in silence. The result, Julian Cross would remain CEO. Mitchell Crane, along with 3 other executives found complicit in financial manipulation and discrimination, were officially removed from their positions and placed under internal investigation. Julian didn't smile in victory. He simply turned to Zaria, the woman who had turned her own story into a voice for hundreds more, and gave her a quiet nod. In that moment, reform was no longer just an ideal. It became a reality others could finally believe in. 3 months later, a new logo was mounted above every garage entrance. Blake Tech, safety is the foundation. But the most striking part wasn't the slogan. It was the person behind it. Zaria Thompson, now Director of System-Wide Safety Oversight, no longer wore grease-stained coveralls. Instead, she moved from garage to garage in a dark blazer, blueprint in hand, inspecting every tool, every bolt, every lift jack. With the sharp eyes of someone who once nearly lost her life to a leaking jack. At the announcement ceremony for the Blake Tech Scholarship Program, dedicated to the children of mechanics and workers, Zaria's eldest son stepped onto the stage to receive a full-ride grant in mechanical engineering. My mom once told me, if they hand you broken tools, use your own hands to build better ones. The entire hall rose in a standing ovation. And Calvin? He was gone from the industry, prosecuted, disgraced. No garage would hire him, not even for a car wash. Videos of him berating Zaria had gone viral, now circulating as a lesson in how power, when abused, always leaves a trace. Julian stood alone in the headquarters lobby, facing a portrait of his father, the man who once built this company from nothing. He whispered, "Sometimes you have to go undercover to truly see the raw, unfiltered truth." And when Zaria spoke at the grand opening of Blake Tech's new safety training center, her closing words brought the entire journey full circle. We spent our whole lives working with broken tools. But when you finally have the right ones, you don't just fix cars. You fix a system that was broken from the inside out.